Right, so we're at item 11.5. This is the Three Waters Better Off funding application. We're on page 118. We have a report there, and I'm going to ask the Chief Executive to speak to that, and then we'll open it for discussion.
Thank you, Worship. So, councillors, as I outlined in the report, following the last council meeting, I contacted our funding advisor and had a discussion with him around the resolution council had passed and the best way going forward. His view was that without submitting and approve a list of projects that met the DIA funding criteria, then the application would probably wouldn't even go any further. So I asked if I could have that conversation escalated, which I did to, which he gave me a name in the DIA itself. And I have to say, the person I spoke to was probably made the most sense out of anybody that I've come across in the whole Three Waters program. And unfortunately, though, it did reinforce the difficulty we would have proceeding the way we wish to. So I then broached the subject as to why they wouldn't accept the library project as a project that could qualify for the funding, especially given the cost escalations that had occurred over the course of when it originally went into the LTP in 2018 to now. And his view was there was no reason why we can't. And so, you know, cut a long story short, where we got to was it can be. And that was reinforced by a letter from DIA signed by the executive director. Essentially, though, what that does, though, of course, is it does free up the money that we were going to put to the library, because we had agreed to fund that, for council to use in considering other projects further on. So the library ticked all the boxes for them. We've been out for public consultation. And we had feedback, a business case had been prepared, the funding had been approved, the project was imminent, iwi were involved, and so all of the DIA criteria for the library had been met. So that's where we've got to. We can apply for the funding and the library qualifies for the funding.
Thank you. Let's open it up for discussion. Councillor Hadfield.
Yeah, a couple of things, and if I can, first, thank you, Your Worship. There's been plenty of discussion around the terms of the contract that councils may have to put their motto to apply for this funding to the DIA. Have those issues or those legal issues been clarified around the ability for councils to continue to criticise the government over the Three Waters reforms?
Yep,
that's the first thing I need answered.
Yeah, they have been, and the advice from DIA is that you can, but also that we've had advice through Communities for Local Democracy legal advice that there is a few tweaks in some of the paragraphs of the agreement, which councils have tweaked, signed it, and sent it back, and it's been accepted. So we would follow that.
So that's good. Okay, so if I may, Your Worship, continue.
Sure.
Yep. So, you know, we've had a bit of a discussion around this, and my view was, as you're aware, troubled by the morals and ethics of this whole process. I still find it deeply disturbing, both morally and ethically, that this sort of funding and the whole process of the Three Waters reforms and throwing taxpayer money at this. It still troubles me, and I find it and the government's approach to this morally reprehensible. I think I likened it to using laundered drug money, and happy to say that in public. However, if we look at the process of what's happening with this first tranche, in the likely event that there may be a change of government in 2023, I don't think that an incumbent government is going to have any means to claw back any of this funding that's been dished out. And I think that's one thing to consider. So I'm personally, I'm opposed to the whole process of this funding and it being offered to councils. However, I feel like I'm going to have to sell my soul to the devil, whichever way you want to look at it. My soul is either the devil or the devil is in my soul. I'm not quite sure which one it is. But, you know, I'm really struggling with this, as I say, morally and ethically. But given the progress that we've made from the original motion that I put, followed by Councillor Ford's alteration to that, is that I can see this as of benefit to the community. It's whilst it's wrong and I don't agree with it, I will actually support applying for this funding to go to the library, and that is on the basis that there are legal channels for us to alter the contract that allows us to continue to criticise the government and criticise the three water reforms. That's essential. And the fact that, as the Chief Executive has pointed out, it's a project that's underway with cost overruns, but it does give council some flexibility to apply in the principle of the motion that was put previously around council choosing. And I think this gives a little bit of leeway to that. So in selling my soul to the devil, Your Worship, I will support the motion, even though I'm against it. So there you go. Thank you, colleagues.
Thank you, Councillor Marsh.
Thank you, Your Worship. Yeah, there was a reason that I brought forward the clarification this morning just around the standing orders. And that is because we haven't had the debate in the public forum. And I think that's most important, that we do that. So as stated in point 2 of our papers before us, the 4th of August meeting, a motion was put in public excluded that the council applies to the first tranche of the three water better off funding of 3.76 million on the basis that the 3.76 million be spent on a list of projects to be agreed by council. And a division was called on that motion of 4 councillors voted against it. Councillor Campbell, Belsky, G. Taylor and myself. So today is the first public forum debate on the better off funding that we should apply. We now have before us the motion today that the council approve the Manawatu Community Hub Development Library project as the project to be submitted for the three waters and the first tranche of funding application of 3.76 million. And I agree with Grant Hadfield that this is still a debt that will be applied to all our ratepayers. And I'd like to remind my fellow councillors that on the Communities for Local Democracy website dated the 18th of the 5th, 22, that the more than $1 billion mooted as part of the No Worse Off and Better Off funding package being given to councils will be funded through future water charges from the new entities. So it's a debt that our ratepayers will have to pay back. And that the chair and Manawatu District Mayor Helen Warboys said, and I quote, "Flaws aside to the then mandate a reform that's overwhelmingly unpopular with communities and requires more than $1 billion in spending to convince councils to come on board is an outstanding waste of money." End quote. Manawatu District Council website last night showed a delegation that spoke on the Three Waters opposition to the Finance and Expenditure Select Committee on Monday, the 29th of August, presented by Deputy Mayor Councillor Ford. During his speech, he stated that based on communities' feedback, the proposed reforms are also opposed by the vast majority of residents of the Manawatu District Council. Of the 2,540 submissions received, 94% were opposed to the proposal. The other 6% either undecided or in support. Also stated, our ratepayers do not want to pay additional rates to subsidise lesser performing councils, usually with low rates, who have failed to invest in necessary infrastructure upgrades. And that MDC has conservatively calculated $2.8 million per annum of stranded overheads remaining after the Three Waters reform. This will directly impact on rural and residential rates, as their overheads will need to be recovered through councils' non-water activities. Added to this will be any better off funding for all the councils and entity C who agree with it. And we have to pay that back through future water charges. In our papers today, 7.2, the 3.76 million funded from the DIA for the Manawatu Community Hub will free up $3.7 million of funding that could be allocated to future projects. And the CE's just mentioned that. That 3.76 million that they're freeing up is still borrowed money. So all of a sudden we've doubled that amount. 10.2, by using the Three Waters Better Off funding, the council does not free up some loan capacity that it may wish to use for other projects. We have a debt that will sit with our new entity. It is still borrowed money that has to be repaid. And again, I repeat, through our future water charges as ratepayers. I continue my strong opposition to even apply for this Better Off funding through the Three Waters and will not be supporting the motion today. Thank you.
Thank you, Shane.
Just a point of clarification. Tranche 1 funding of 500 million doesn't transfer to the new entities as a debt. That's only the tranche 2 funding of 1 billion that is on offer come 1 July 2024. So this 500 million is a handout basically from the government. I don't doubt the taxpayers will pick up. That's where it's got to come from, but it's not a direct ratepayer impact through water charges or council charges.
Thank you.
Councillor Ford.
Yeah, I think it's an important point because if it was a debt to the entity water ratepayers, I would probably support Councillor Marsh, but that's not actually the case in for this particular tranche. It is not a debt. It is it's a handout from the taxpayer. You could say it's a debt to the taxpayer, but and I don't have a soul, so I can't sell it to the devil. But I'm delighted with the work of the Chief Executive to get us to this point in getting the decision in respect to the Manawatu Community Hub Redevelopment Library project, to have that approved, because I think it does tick the boxes. And while I might disagree with the government giving out all this money to all the councils, I'm here to represent this community, and I think it would be irresponsible not to apply for it, given that there aren't any significant fishhooks. We've been through that. We've had legal advice. Chief Executive's just explained that to Councillor Hadfield's question, and so $3.76 million is money for our community that we would be irresponsible not to pick up, in my opinion, particularly given that there will not be a debt to the ratepayer or the water ratepayer.
Councillor Corey.
Thank you, Worship. Yeah, that's one of the good things about being in politics, is every now and then we end up being hypocrites. And although I agree entirely with Councillor Ford and Hatfield, you know, my views on the library, those are different to what we're discussing at the moment. I feel a total hypocrite to be voting for it, but there is no other option in regard to the way I see it. And it would be a abdication of duty if we didn't vote to take the money that's on offer. So I will support this, but yeah, with the greatest knowledge that I'll be a hypocrite because of doing it.
Thank you, Councillor Casey.
Yeah, Councillor Quarry, you raised some interesting points about being a hypocrite. I think it's been a catch cry in this government to push local government into no other option. That seems to be modus operandi, if I could use that word. But also, to your worship, it highlights the fact that through the Better Off funding, that government should be invested into local government. And I think this is a classic example why. And I think it sets the precedent for the future as well for local government, so central government to invest in local government. Probably to the point that we probably haven't seen this sort of level of funding probably since the 60s, when, sort of, for example, our wastewater treatment plant and Armidale were essentially, I understand, paid for by central government. Council too, I just want to, in my second point, just want to highlight the fact that let's not forget about our rural needs as well. So, for example, Tururu Valley irrigation scheme or water intake. Let's not forget about those ones as well, particularly for the perhaps the new council coming in to look at the strategic asset that is up there in regards to farmland that's actually not irrigated at the moment, but also too for water intakes for those who are currently without water through up the valleys. So it's just, although I understand the business case was not made in time, I think there's also opportunity for dialogue with those residents in the Tururu Valley for future projects in the near future.
Thank you. Councillor Short.
Thank you. I will be supporting this today. I just wanted to ask the Chief Executive, there's not many dates mentioned here, so there's a number of dates. They're pulling things forward and making us make decisions about some things before we know the outcomes of the others, which I think is a pressure. So the Select Committee hearings on Monday, when do we expect to hear a final outcome from that, or is there no date given? It's sometime in the future?
Not aware of a date.
No, we haven't had a date.
Indication was November.
Yeah.
And if we put this application in and are successful, is there a date when we would find out by?
We have to have the application by the 30th of September. Most applications have been taking between 3 and 5 weeks. But I would say, given the fact we've got a letter of support,
Yes.
that this should sail
Should
through
go
pretty
fairly
quickly.
quickly.
Yeah.
And then I guess my next question is, so if we're successful with the 3.76 million, which is already on our books, at what stage will this council discuss what next, because that money has been freed up?
Well, I would suggest a 3-year annual plan process.
Yep.
I mean, some of those projects that have been talked about, such as Thurdsay, because of the amount of expenditure, they actually trigger the significant engagement policy. So, you know, we need to use the annual plan process for those key projects.
And potentially fielding stormwater as well.
That's right.
Yes. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you. Any Councillor Belsky?
I'm definitely opposed to it. I do not trust governments. They break laws all the time. They're the biggest law breakers at the moment. And because it's part of the Three Waters payment for our assets, I understand it's a part payment. Is that correct?
No.
It's not going to be, are they going to pay us what, 15, this is their projection, 15 million for our assets? Is
No.
that
No,
right?
no, it's not a payment for
It's
assets.
not a payment for assets.
It's just a payment.
Has it got nothing to do with Three Waters?
Yeah, well,
It is not compensation
not
for our
compensation.
assets,
No.
and that's our key opposition.
Yeah, but I, because we oppose it so much, I know Stratford's taken it, but I just can't trust them. I feel we're taking money. It sounds really good, and I agree we could use it, but that further down the road, I don't want to be responsible for what I believe could happen. The reputation of our government is not good, and so I would definitely oppose it on those grounds.
Thank you, Councillor G. Taylor.
Yeah, thank you. Look, I'd like to further extend on what Councillor Casey is suggesting. I think if this is genuine and we're taking it at face value, the investment in local government is significant compared to what we have seen historically for a very long time. Totally in favour of this suggestion, as long as we haven't got any hidden hooks, which it doesn't seem as though we do.
Thank you. Yeah, and I would support those comments as well, but I would like to see added to the recommendation that whatever the appropriate words are, is that we make the adjustments to the 4 clauses in the agreement before we sign it off.
Just those 4 adjustments based on other councils doing that or our own legal advice?
It was based on legal advice that we sought, and then that was given to all councils through Communities for Local Democracy, recommending that they consider doing that if they're taking this money.
Yeah, understood. Thank you.
If I may,
Councillor Marsh.
if I may, Your Worship, just picking up on Councillor Casey's and Councillor Heather G. Taylor's, this is not funding for local government. funding thereof. It's actually a stipulated a 3 water better off funding that it's coming from. And I think that must be stipulated in all our discussions that we're putting. It's not extra funding for local government and our local council and what have you. It's actually 3 water better off funding. And as I went through the process last night and just had a look at websites, etc., at that stage, which was back in May, the comment was made that the government's already spent 34 million on the advertising and what have you of 3 waters. Now they're talking $2 billion extra that they're going to give out within this. And sure, it might not be put back to our ratepayers, but it's put back to our taxpayers. And I'm desperately worried for my grandchildren and how they're going to pay all this extra debt back. And I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Ford.
I'll move that the council approve the Manawatu Community Hub redevelopment project as the project to be submitted with the 3 waters first tranche funding application of 3.76 million, and that we follow the legal advice in the application.
I'm happy to second that. Thank you.
Can I just ask a question? Is there any reason why Councillor Campbell's left the room?
Yes, he had an appointment and he did advise, and I did advise at the beginning of the meeting that he had to leave.
Did he give his opinion as to the motion put today?
No,
He needs to be present.
he has to be present to vote.
It seems unfair in the fact that he was one of the ones that called for the division in the previous motion.
That's his call, unfortunately.
Okay. Yeah, I'd still like to call for a division.
Thank you. So we have a mover and a seconder. Any further discussion? Councillor Hadfield.
Yeah, just in terms of the motion that Councillor Ford's put up around, have it repeated, the legal.
The legal advice of the application.
I'm just wondering if that needs to be a bit more specific.
It does, around the 4 clauses.
As advised from the legal advice obtained from several legal, whatever. But there's 4, if I understand, there's 4 clauses.
There are 4 clauses that we are recommending some changes to make them more clear about what they mean.
I think we should mention the 4 clauses rather than be specific about what they are.
Yeah.
But I think we need to be that little bit more specific.
Happy with that?
Thank you. So we'll just give the team a sec to get the wording right. Councillor Quarry.
It was mentioned earlier on that the possibility of changing our opinion in regard to what the money to be spent on. This constrains us solely to the library. Could, if a brilliant idea popped up in the next couple of months, we change it for 100,000 here or 200,000 there?
No, it's still got to be approved. If at the moment we have approval for this money going to the library community hub, if we were to change that, our application would have to be then go back to the beginning and be considered by the DAA. But the point the chief executive is saying is if there are other projects and if we decide to reallocate the 3.76 that we don't need to put into this library project by accepting this money, that's when we could consider those projects.
A good example of that, I believe, would be the security cameras for the centre of town.
Yeah, it could well be. Yeah.
That whole discussion needs to be had about how we do that, and the CEO is suggesting we do that through the annual plan process.
And I think that's the appropriate way, Councillor Quarry, to adhere.
But I think that's a good point. And I think
it is a good point. And all the projects, get put on the table in their merit with the information and detail for us to make an informed decision.
That would be quite a useful spend of money.
So,
It's
so
one
while
idea.
we haven't, there's a note in there that we haven't approved any of those on the previous list, we didn't actually say no to them either.
No,
We're kind of still silent. So if this all goes through, we've got potentially 3.76 million to spend on other projects and all suggestions are still live and on the table, and new ones can be added as well through the annual plan process. So it does give us plenty of options and flexibility.
Thank you. I seconded that motion.
So that's the motion that I'd come up with The mover and seconder are happy with it.
Thank you. That the council approve the Manawatu Community Hub redevelopment project as the project to be submitted with the Three Waters first tranche funding application of 3.76 million, and that the funding agreement be amended in respect of the 4 clauses that are identified in the legal advice obtained through Communities for Local Democracy.
I'm happy with that amended wording.
Thank you. Myself too. So,
Oh, just one.
Councillor Short.
Should we be using the acronym? Oh, yeah, okay. I was just going to say, we've always got to remember that minutes get looked back on in the
Yes.
future, and who will know what CFIP.
Thank you, Steph. Steph will put that in full, Communities for Local Democracy. Thank you. So that being the case, I'll put the motion. All those, division has been called. So all those in favour, well, no, division, sorry. Councillor Marsh.
Is the
You
vote-
asked for division for this motion. Your voters, Councillor Quarry,
Yes.
Councillor Short.
Yes.
Sorry, I don't want to go too fast while we record. You're right. Councillor Casey. Myself, yes. Councillor Ford,
Yes.
Councillor Hadfield,
On behalf of the devil, yes.
Councillor G Taylor,
Yes.
and Councillor Belsky. Thank you. The motion is carried. Thank you. Right, so that brings us to the end of our agenda for our formal council meeting. And so with that, I'll declare our meeting closed and we'll take a break for morning tea.
Gavin, this is he was washing up, and your mum has kindly taken the time to polish up properly.